Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Experience Kills. I am your host Ben and with me today is Richard.
Again, I'd never leave your side, Ben, whether you like it or not.
My PIC.
Good job, innit? Because nothing you can do about it.
You're kind of in a way like an evil curse brought about by some kind of old god trickster.
Not really evil. It's more of a benevolent curse. Like, I'm slightly annoying, but you can't really begrudge me because I'm quite nice.
That's fair. That's fair. Should we talk about something that is definitely evil? Full of horrors unimagined, of many-angled cosmic terrors. And that is Stygian, Rein of the Old Ones, out now on PC. That's right, I played a CRPG, but by that I mean you can either call that a classic RPG or a computer RPG. So an RPG in that old style that you remember seeing in the 90s and stuff like that, typically only available on PC. As far as I know, there's no word on this coming to the consoles, and to be honest, with the control scheme and the way this game works, that's probably not going to play out. But basically, there's been a bit of a rush on Lovecraft-inspired horror games of late, hasn't there? We played a few of them here at Experience Kills. We played. Did either of us play The Sinking City? I'm not sure.
No, that's come out fairly recently, and I've not tried that yet. But we played the Cthulhu one before that. Was it Call of Cthulhu? Yes.
We did. We quite liked that, didn't we?
We did. I quite enjoyed that for what it was. A first person adventure. Quite different to what we're talking about today, though.
It's a bit different, this. I mean, and I think, in a way, the perspective of this game, with its kind of isometric, pulled back, top-down view, it's got a really nice sort of drawn art style to it. But I think the problem is that perspective is going to put some people off. The C aspect of this RPG, as it were, the computer RPG aspect, which is a bit of a shame, because at its core, this is one of the most Lovecraftian games I've ever played. And I mean, it doubles down on bleak, twisted, despair-ridden cosmic horror. It's absolutely oppressive and upsetting and just, everything you'd want from a Lovecraftian game, really. It's really the writing, I think, and the understanding of this subgenre of horror is what sets this game apart when it comes to this type of this sort of Lovecraft game. I think Call of Cthulhu was 2/3 of the way there. I think Sinking City, from what I've read and what I've seen, is getting there, but this is all the way there. I mean, basically the concept in this is that it's set in Arkham, and Arkham has been pulled through to somewhere else, no longer on Earth, and everybody is losing their minds to some degree. You build a character out of a various selection of classes, and my character, Abigail, was a scientist sort of researcher type, doubling down on psychology and science abilities and medicine. So very logical, someone that wants to rely on the sciences to explain the weird awfulness going on around her, which is very much a Lovecraftian character type, because they're often the protagonists in his stories, and they're often elitist arseholes that look down on everybody else, which is exactly how I played Abigail. And the game actually rewards you for playing in the style of your character build. So if you pick that class, it then encourages you to role play in that style, in that way, which I think is really cool, and it's very old school. But if you understand Lovecraft mythos, it makes a lot of sense for you to do that, and it's not going to be that hard for you to do it either. I think this game is 100% designed for people that understand and have experienced Lovecraft, who've read the texts, who have at least delved into a lot of the inspired by media that exists now. It's not going to be accessible to someone that doesn't get it. Like, it really wears its inspirations very, very plainly on its sleeve, and I really like that. I mean, does this sort of stuff interest you, Rich?
Yeah, it does. I've read a bit of Lovecraft, and that is kind of the point of it. It's not supposed to be accessible. It's supposed to make you think and feel that there's something slightly out of view that unsettles you to the point that you can't quite trust the world that you live in anymore. And the books do that. Some of the games do that. Some of the Lovecraft-inspired games. So the old favourite is Eternal Darkness, although it wasn't explicitly referencing Lovecraft, it was one of those where it had that unsettling feeling. Some of the more recent releases haven't quite got that because they have diluted it down to be more of an accessible experience that people can kind of get. But the best Lovecraft experiences are ones that are that little bit out of reach that you've got to work for. So yeah, this does sound interesting. It doesn't look like the sort of thing that immediately evokes a strong atmosphere because of the graphical fidelity that we're talking about here. It's sort of top-down, fairly rudimentary graphics, isn't it? But I suppose it's all in the audio cues, some of the dialogue I've seen. I haven't played it, you've played it, but from some of the videos I've seen, some of the audio cues and the dialogue sound like they tap into that vibe quite well.
Yeah.
So yeah, very interesting.
So this has obviously been made by a relatively small studio called Cultic Games out of Turkey, which I think, as far as I know, is the first time I played a game from Turkey, which is pretty cool. I like that just in itself. And I think what's quite cool is there's not really any voice acting in this game. It's all written, but it's written very, very well. And I think the way they might get around a bit of language barrier and translation issue is that when you're talking to someone who's losing their mind, it's hard to say if the gobbledygook coming out is intended or due to a translation issue. So it kind of just works.
So there's no voices. The voices in the trailers, that's just for the trailers then, right?
I think there is some VO. There's an intro kind of movie which has some VO and stuff. But for the most part, I haven't really come across any VO in the game. My character doesn't speak. The NPCs you meet, there's loads of dialogue. There's absolutely loads of talking, because one of the things about Stygian is that in a very CRPG style, you can basically avoid almost every combat encounter by either thinking your way around it or talking your way around it. So speechcraft, or using logic or science or medicine, or there's various other abilities and skills that you can basically always find a way of getting around combat. And I really like that. Again, that's very Lovecraftian, because if you think about the protagonists in Lovecraft stories, they're not usually going around shooting people, are they? They're much more likely going to be academics. They're much more likely going to be someone using their hyper intellect to deal with situations, because Lovecraft was a snob that thought if you resorted to force, you were probably some kind of subhuman. So it definitely lends itself towards that. And like I said, my character is this scientific researcher and psychologist and all of this, and so she's using speechcraft. And often, there's a great interaction I had with this guy who thought he was some kind of world-class darts champion, and I basically used my psychology skill to make him realize he was losing his mind. He then ran off screaming in a massive despair and probably went to kill himself. But I got points for that, so that's okay.
Well, that's what matters. Well done, mate.
Yeah. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of choices in this game. There's a lot of implications from dialogue that you have. There's, they feel like there are real ramifications to everything that you do. And there's lots of systems at play that really reinforce that. Like I said, there's deep customization. There's RPG mechanics up the wazoo. Every skill points and ability points, and there's inventory management. Everything you'd expect from a CRPG type game. And the combat, if you do end up doing it, is kind of like XCOM Lite. So it's turn-based. It's grid-based using a hexagonal system. I didn't love the combat. I found it serviceable. It was fine. But to be honest, I'd much rather use my ability checks, my speech checks, my psychology abilities to get around the combat than ever to actually end up in it. And when I did end up in it, you could run away. And I would often choose to run away, because I was some fairly frail woman who was just holding on to her sanity. I wasn't really going to be very good with a gun.
Frail woman. You've spent too much with these Lovecraft novels, mate.
Perhaps I have, yeah. I definitely dive deep into this. I really like this game. It's not perfect. Like I said, the combat is probably the weaker aspect. I think the time has been spent mostly on the world building and the writing of the dialogue and things like that. I like the art style personally, but I do think, like you said as well, and I mentioned at the top, the perspective of this game is going to put people off, because it's not very accessible in its style.
It's not inviting, and it doesn't get across the atmosphere that is beneath the surface of a game like this. It takes some work to penetrate, and takes, I suppose, a leap of faith, and that's something we're not used to with modern video games, that they do all of the work for us with more modern graphics. The imagination is taken out of it, isn't it? And we're kind of just spoon-fed that atmosphere without imagining it ourselves. But when you go back to the roots of this genre, to things like the Spectrum had this sort of game on it, and you really had to imagine that there was anything behind those block graphics in those days. So yeah, I guess if you're willing to put the work in and have a strong imagination that you're willing to invest, then I guess that this might be more your cup of tea.
One of the things I think I will compliment the developer on is that they have committed to the Lovecraftian style in ways that the bigger sort of AA, AAA releases we've seen recently haven't. There is bad language, there is quite a lot of swearing in the dialogue, and I kind of respected that. And I also respected, I haven't seen a lot of overt racism, but I get the impression that they are not shying away from some of the, how should I put it, more awful sides of Lovecraftian sort of fiction. They're not necessarily being as overtly racist as the writer himself, but by putting this town of Arkham in this situation, where people are losing their minds, there is an opportunity for depravity. Basically, the rule of law has collapsed. The mob have taken over a large part of this town, and then the cult, the kind of old one's cult, has taken over the other part, and they're all kind of working together to basically descend this entire city into a depraved kind of awful hellscape. So you are trying to survive this, and also trying to work out what has happened, and from my character's perspective, logically explain it. Yeah, good luck, love. So if you're in the mood for something very, very deep and very, very engaging, I would say, Stygian Reign of the Old Ones is one to look out for on PC. I believe it's at a £20 to £30 price point, somewhere in that area, and can be found on Steam and GOG and stuff like that. So it's definitely out there and available. Yeah, it's a challenging experience. I really liked some of the narrative stuff. I really like all the choices, and I like how you can play it like non-combat. I guess I like games that give you those sort of options. Yeah, it's cool. Any other questions before we wrap this one up, Rich?
No, I'd be interested to see it. I mean, that is a difficult problem when you're referencing pieces of art and culture from back along as far as Lovecraft goes. It was a different time, and there's some unfortunate baggage that comes with that. But yeah, if they've dealt with it in a responsible way while still respecting the feeling of the original text, then they've done a good job.
So with that, that's another episode of Experience Kills. You can find me on Twitter at DIYE. You can find Richard at Colonel Red. You can find us, obviously, at Experience Kills. If you've been listening to this on one of our various ways you can get this on a podcast feed, please head over to YouTube, over to our website, and give us a like and subscribe. That's all we ask. And if you've been watching the video, these are all available as audio as well, so you can just listen along when you're down the gym or running from an evil old one. I mean, that does happen more often than you realise, doesn't it, Richard? Let's be honest. So I would say with that, that's another episode, and we'll be back soon with more, Richard.
Cheers.
Bye.